I think one of the things that really has, I guess, driven, the U.S. to seize Venezuela in some ways is the fact that we have seen China and its influence into the Latin America and the Western Hemisphere. Do you see China in any way responding in a big way to what we've seen in the last few days?
In terms of commitment beyond verbal condemnation, I don't see more of a comeback from China. It has been quite conservative when it comes to more investment commitment or military commitment in the Latin American region, especially when it comes to Venezuela. It represents one of those sunk cost relationship that China has committed a long time ago to invest in infrastructure. But when it comes to political influence during the years, under the U.S. pressure, China has made very little inroad.
Okay, well, it could well be, let me just rephrase it could well be a sunk cost specifically on Venezuela. Let me just use an accounting concept. It still is an ongoing concern as it pertains to China's influence in Latin America. How does it change that broader strategy then?
Well, China's Latin American strategy is a quite important node of its Belt and Road Initiative. But in the past decade, we can see that the public financed projects has been steadily declining, but the private interest remains. We have seen a lot of Chinese companies investing in Latin America. So if we're talking about influence of sphere of the economic perspective, China has a pretty high impact on the region. But politically, militarily, or in other initiatives, China is really lagging behind. But one positive improvement I have seen significantly in the past few years is in terms of the monetary cooperation. And in last December, President Xi Jinping came out to talk about its Latin America strategy in its policy paper. And there, at the center of it, it's about deepening the financial collaboration and the monetary collaboration. And that means China's RMB internationalization in Latin America will deepen. And the trade settlement will have more of a market, especially when it comes to the countries under sanctions from the U.S.
Yeah, when you talk about these spheres of influence, right, this quote-unquote Dunroe doctrine that the president has named it, of the U.S. has the authority to assert control over Latin America and to actually reject other outside countries from getting involved. What do you think that how China looks at that right now? I mean, does that give any sort of move for China to claim East Asia, for example? The implications for Taiwan, do you think that there are any, and are they valid?
The Latin America is not really a playbook for China's strategy on Taiwan. And China is quite pragmatic when it comes to this sphere of influence concept. If similar situation like Venezuela operation happened in Asia, China would have responded way more forcefully than what it did after this incident. We have to acknowledge that the cost of control, economically or politically, increase exponentially with distance. And South America, it cannot be further from China anywhere on Earth. But for Asian region, it is really the sphere of influence for China. Even if we don't fully agree with the whole concept, China has more of an economic impact rather than political impact for any of those countries. But nonetheless, the political and economic coercion is more likely when it comes to Taiwan. And we can see that the China hawks after the Venezuela operation has toned down significantly as well, because the popular narrative before was that the East is rising, the West is declining. But now it seems that all of a sudden people all realize that America has the military might to just deter whatever China wants to do to Taiwan if they really want to.
Yeah, but hasn't China taken advantage of this opportunity to, well, largely, and we've had an interview this week that talks about that, to discredit the United States for, at least in this specific case, its disregard for sovereignty?
The international law certainly is not binding for big powers like the U.S. So China could take advantage of that. But when it comes to practical measures against Taiwan, it probably would be more realistic for China to use economic coercion, more of a sanction for Taiwanese companies, or more restrictions on the shipping routes. But for a military attack, it is very much a last resort decision. Because if China really decides to do this, it has to make sure that it's a quick, decisive win. It has to make sure that it doesn't turn into this wicked situation like Gaza or a prolonged war like Ukraine and Russia, because after that, the perceived military credibility of China will be badly damaged if it's not really a quick win.
Just a theoretical exercise. Let's assume for a moment that this did not happen, Venezuela this year. Does it in any way affect, how does it change, if any at all, China's foreign policy priorities this year? And what would those be, agnostic of whether or not this thing happened or not?
Well, we just published our top risks for the year. Actually, the China-U.S. relation and the Taiwan issue are not among the top risks. They're just red herrings. And China will do everything in their power to make sure that this year the China-U.S. relation will have this stable environment, especially before the April Trump visit to China, and also later in the year, President Xi will reciprocate and visit Washington. So this is quite a diplomatic year. And for China, the priority is really to take this time as a breathing room to fix some of the domestic vulnerabilities. And domestic economy is certainly one of them, but mostly it's about the neighborhood environment. China has been engaging quite heavily with its neighbors, the ASEAN countries, the Korean development we can see is quite positive. The bilateral relation with Japan has been in a very risky stage, and there is no way that China is going to back out in its current position. So it has to engage as much as possible with the rest of Asia.